The first rumble of thunder rolled across downtown Phoenix like a distant artillery barrage, sending an involuntary shiver down Harold Martinez's spine as he stood among the sea of American flags rippling in the November wind. At 73, his weathered hands still bore the calluses of a lifetime of hard work, but it was the Purple Heart pinned to his faded military jacket that told the real story of who Harold Martinez had been and who he was desperately trying to remember how to be. "Grandpa, are you okay?" 8-year-old Sophia's small hand squeezed his fingers with surprising strength, her dark eyes reflecting the same concern that had been haunting his family for months. Harold looked down at her sweet face, framed by pigtails tied with red, white, and blue ribbons specially chosen for Veterans Day, and forced what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "I'm fine, Mia," he whispered, though the word fine felt like a lead on his tongue. Nothing had been fine since the diagnosis 6 months ago. Early-stage dementia, the doctor had said, as if adding early stage somehow softened the blow of watching his mind slowly slip away like water through cupped hands. The Veterans Day ceremony at Phoenix's downtown Memorial Plaza had drawn nearly 5,000 people, the largest turnout in the city's history. Red, white, and blue bunting draped from every lamppost, while a military honor guard stood at perfect attention near the black granite wall inscribed with names of Arizona's fallen heroes. The atmosphere should have been one of respectful celebration, but Harold felt something else entirely creeping into his consciousness, like smoke seeping under a door. The crowd pressed closer as the ceremony began. Shoulders bumped against him from every direction. Voices blended into an incomprehensible roar. Camera flashes exploded like muzzle fire in his peripheral vision. Harold's breathing became shallow, rapid. His chest tightened as if someone had wrapped steel bands around his ribs and was slowly cranking them tighter. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker, General Patricia Morrison." The announcer's voice boomed through the sound system, but to Harold, it sounded distorted, echoing, like voices calling through a tunnel filled with smoke and screams. Sophia's grip on his hand became an anchor to reality, but even that was beginning to feel distant, dreamlike. The Purple Heart on his chest seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment, as if the weight of 50 years' worth of buried memories was finally demanding to be acknowledged. Harold had earned that medal on March 15, 1968, during what the Army had euphemistically called a reconnaissance mission near the Cambodian border. What it really was hell on earth. His Unit Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion, had walked straight into an ambush that left 12 men dead and Harold with shrapnel in his shoulder and fragments of memory that never quite fit together the same way twice. He hadn't talked about Vietnam in 30 years. Not since his wife Maria Elena had finally stopped asking, finally accepted that some doors in her husband's heart would remain forever locked. But today, surrounded by flags and fanfare, those doors were rattling on their hinges. The thunder rumbled again, closer this time, and Harold's head snapped toward the sky. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark and pregnant with rain that would arrive too late to cool the desert heat. But in Harold's mind, those weren't storm clouds. They were smoke plumes rising from a jungle canopy 50 years, 10,000 miles away. "Rodriguez, you see movement at 2 o'clock?" The voice came from somewhere deep in Harold's memory, but it sounded as clear as if someone had whispered it directly in his ear. He turned his head, expecting to see Rodriguez's familiar face grinning beneath his battered helmet, but there was only a teenage boy in a Phoenix Suns jersey staring at him with confusion. Sophia tugged at his hand. "Grandpa? The man is talking about heroes." General Morrison's voice drifted over the crowd. "These brave men and women sacrificed everything for the freedoms we hold dear today. They answered the call when their country needed them most, carrying not just weapons, but the hopes and dreams of a grateful nation. But Harold wasn't hearing General Morrison anymore. He was hearing Sergeant Williams briefing Charlie Company before what would be their final patrol. Together, listen up, people. Intelligence says this sector is clean, but we all know how reliable intelligence can be. Keep your eyes open, watch each other's backs, and remember, we all go home together or nobody goes home at all. Nobody went home at all. Not really. Not completely. The crowd around Harold seemed to pulse and sway like living thing, faces blurring together until they weren't faces anymore, but camouflaged figures moving through elephant grass. As ceremonial rifle shots, fired by the honor guard, echoed like a K-47 fire. A disciplined applause sounded like helicopter rotors beating the air above a hot landing zone. Harold's free hand moved instinctively to his shoulder, where the old shrapnel wound still ached before storms. The metal on his chest felt scorching hot against his skin. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool November air. "Thompson! Martinez!" "We got movement." The voice was urgent, desperate, and it was coming from inside Harold's own head, but it sounded real enough to make him take a step forward. Then another, his grip on Sophia's hand beginning to loosen without his conscious awareness. The little girl looked up at her grandfather with growing alarm. His eyes had gone distant, glassy, focused on something she couldn't see. His breathing was becoming irregular, almost panicked. "Grandpa? Grandpa, you're scaring me." But Harold was no longer in Phoenix. He was back in the jungle, back where the air tasted of cordite and fear, back where every shadow might hide death and every step might be his last. The crowd around him faded into green jungle canopy. The Memorial Plaza transformed into a dirt trail winding through hostile territory. And somewhere in that tangle of memory and reality, Harold Martinez let go of his granddaughter's hand and took his first step into a nightmare that would change everything. "Sophia, Sophia, where's your grandfather?" Maria Martinez's voice cracked with panic as she pushed through the crowd, her eyes frantically scanning the sea of faces for any sign of her father or daughter. The Veterans Day ceremony continued around her, but the patriotic speeches and ceremonial honors had become background noise to her growing terror. "I don't know, Mama." Sophia's tears streamed down her cheeks as she stood frozen in the exact spot where Harold had released her hand. He was talking to someone who wasn't there, and then he just he just walked away. I tried to follow him, but there were too many people. 3 blocks away, completely unaware of his family's anguish, Harold Martinez moved through downtown Phoenix like a ghost haunting his own memories. The bustling city streets had transformed in his mind into the dense, suffocating jungle of South Vietnam, circa 1968. Every car horn became distant artillery fire. Every shadow cast by the towering buildings morphed into potential enemy positions. The afternoon sun beating down on the concrete felt exactly like the oppressive heat he remembered from that final fatal patrol. "Charlie Company, sound off." Harold called out to the empty air, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had once been responsible for the lives of 37 soldiers. Pedestrians stopped and stared as the elderly veteran in his faded military jacket marched with surprising precision down the sidewalk, occasionally stopping to peer around corners as if checking for snipers. At the Phoenix Police Department's downtown substation, Detective Sarah Chun was monitoring the veterans' day event through the city's extensive camera network when something caught her attention on Screen 7. An elderly man in military dress was walking erratically through the financial district, appearing to have animated conversations with invisible companions. "Control, this is Detective Chun. I've got a possible 5150 on 5th Street. Elderly male, appears to be having some kind of episode," she radioed, zooming in on Harold's face. The cameras captured every detail with crystal clarity the purple. Heart gleaming on his chest, the service ribbons that spoke of tours in Southeast Asia, the confusion and fear etched deep into his weathered features. Copy that, Detective. Units are responding. Any indication of weapons or violence? Chun watched as Harold suddenly dropped to a crouch behind a parked car, scanning the street as if under enemy fire. Negative on weapons, but he's definitely not in touch with reality. Recommend mental health response team. Meanwhile, Harold's flashback was intensifying with each passing moment. The parked car he crouched behind had become a fallen log in his mind, providing precious cover from invisible enemies who are always just beyond his line of sight. The businessman walking past became a point man, and Harold felt compelled to warn him about the dangers ahead. "Rodriguez," he called out, grabbing the startled man's arm. "Don't take point today, brother. I got a bad feeling about this patrol. The jungle's too quiet." The businessman, a 50-year-old accountant named David Kim, who had never been closer to military service than watching war movies, jerked away in alarm. "Sir, I think you need help. Should I call someone?" But Harold was already moving again, his military training taking over even as his mind remained trapped in 1968. He advanced tactically from cover to cover, using doorways and vehicles as concealment, occasionally dropping hand signals that had once meant the difference between life and death to the men under his command. "Movement at 3 o'clock. Harold suddenly shouted, pointing at a delivery truck that, in his mind, had become an enemy transport. "Thompson, get on the radio. Tell Firebase Alpha we need immediate extraction." By now, a small crowd had begun to gather, their initial curiosity quickly turning to concern and then fear. Harold's behavior was becoming more agitated, more unpredictable. He was clearly a veteran, that much was obvious from his military bearing and the decorations on his jacket, but he was also clearly in the grip of something beyond anyone's ability to help. "Someone call the cops," whispered Margaret O'Brien, clutching her purse tighter as she watched Harold search the ground for something only he could see. "He might be dangerous." "Look at his medals," countered James Rivera, himself a Gulf War veteran who recognized the signs of severe PTSD. "This man served. He's not dangerous, he's hurting." But fear, once it takes root in a crowd, spreads faster than understanding. Cell phones emerged from pockets and purses. Videos began recording. Social media posts started circulating with captions like, "Crazy veteran disrupting downtown," and "Dangerous old man needs to be stopped." Harold, meanwhile, was completely oblivious to the modern world closing in around him. In his mind, he was still searching desperately for his missing squad members in a jungle where every tree might hide death and every sound might signal an ambush. The weight of command pressed down on his shoulders like a physical force 37. Men under his care, and he had lost them all in the space of 10 horrific minutes. "Williams, Sergeant Williams, where are you?" His voice broke with genuine anguish as he called for his squad leader, a man who had been dead for over 50 years, but who remained as real to Harold in this moment as his own heartbeat. "We got separated from the column. The radio's dead. How do we get home?" The crowd around him continued to grow, drawn by the spectacle, but maintaining a cautious distance. Some filmed with their phones, others called 911, and a few mostly older veterans who recognized the demons that Harold was fighting tried unsuccessfully to approach him with calm, soothing voices. "Sir, you're safe," called out Robert Chun, a Vietnam veteran who had been shopping nearby when he heard the commotion. "The war is over. You're home now." But Harold couldn't hear him over the roar of helicopters that existed only in his memory. Couldn't see him through the jungle canopy that had materialized on a Phoenix street corner. He was lost in time, caught between two worlds, and completely unaware that he was about to become the center of a confrontation that would test the Very definition of what it means to serve and protect. The distinctive growl of a police cruiser's engine cut through the downtown Phoenix afternoon like a blade through silk. Officer Jake Reynolds gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles as he navigated through the crowd that had gathered. Around the disturbance, a crowd that seemed to grow larger and more agitated with each passing minute. In the passenger seat of his specially modified K9 unit, Rex shifted restlessly in his reinforced compartment, his keen senses already picking up the tension that hung in the air like electricity before a lightning strike. Rex was no ordinary police dog. At 90 pounds of pure German Shepherd muscle and intelligence, he represented 5 years of intensive training that had cost the Phoenix Police Department over $50,000. His bite force measured at 238 pounds per square inch, enough to crush bone. His speed could reach 35 miles per hour in a dead sprint. His success rate in apprehending suspects was an unprecedented 100% across 48 deployments. When Rex was called to a scene, situations got resolved quickly and definitively. Unit 47 to control. We're approaching the location now, Reynolds radioed, his voice steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. Through his windshield, he could see the crowd had formed a loose circle around something or someone near the corner of 5th and Washington. Cell phone cameras were everywhere, held high above the crowd like digital torches. The age of viral videos and instant social media judgment meant that every move he made in the next few minutes would be scrutinized, analyzed, and potentially weaponized against the department. Copy. Unit 47. Multiple units en route for backup. Witnesses report. Elderly male, possibly armed, exhibiting erratic and threatening behavior. Approach with extreme caution. Armed? Reynolds hadn't heard anything about weapons in the initial dispatch, but information had a way of morphing and escalating as it passed through the chain of command. He pulled the cruiser to a stop 50 yards from the crowd and stepped out, immediately feeling the weight of dozens of eyes turning toward him and his four-legged partner. Rex emerged from the vehicle like a coiled spring being released. His ears were erect, his tail straight and alert, his entire body radiating the controlled power that made him simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. The crowd instinctively took several steps backward as the massive German Shepherd took his position at Reynolds' left side, his dark eyes scanning the scene with predatory intensity. Jesus Christ, look at the size of that dog, someone whispered from the crowd. That thing could tear a man apart, another voice added, and Reynolds felt the familiar mixture of pride and responsibility that came with handling such a formidable partner. But as they moved closer to the center of the disturbance, Reynolds began to see details that made his training and experience collide with his human compassion in ways that made his chest tighten. The threatening suspect was a frail-looking, elderly man in a faded military jacket, his gray hair disheveled, his movements jerky and uncoordinated rather than aggressive. The weapon appeared to be nothing more than his own trembling hands as he gestured at invisible enemies that only he could see. Harold Martinez was now completely lost in his flashback, reliving the final moments of that ambush from March 15th, 1968. In his mind, the growing crowd of concerned citizens and curious onlookers had become North Vietnamese Army regulars closing in on his position. The police sirens wailing in the distance were helicopter rotors beating the air above a compromised landing zone. The cell phone cameras trained on him were the scopes of enemy rifles, and the frightened voices of the crowd were the shouts of his dying squad members calling for help that would never come. "Where's the medevac?" Harold shouted, his voice cracking with 50-year-old desperation. "We got wounded. Rodriguez is hit bad. Thompson's not responding." He dropped to one knee beside a concrete planter that, in his fractured perception, had become Rodriguez's bleeding body. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, applying pressure to wounds that existed only in his memory. "Stay with me, Rodriguez. Don't you dare die on me." The crowd watched in stunned fascination as the elderly veteran performed field medicine on empty air, his movements precise and professional, despite the obvious mental break from reality. Some lowered their phones, suddenly ashamed of treating a human being's suffering as entertainment. Others kept recording, convinced they were documenting something either dangerous or historic. Reynolds approached slowly, Rex maintaining perfect healed position, despite the confusing sensory input overwhelming his enhanced canine perception. The dog could smell Harold's fear-genuine primal terror that spoke to something deeper than ordinary criminal behavior. There was also something else, a scent that Rex's training had never quite prepared him for, the distinctive odor of old combat gear, gun oil that had soaked into fabric over decades, and something indefinable that seemed to cling to men who had seen too much death too young. "Sir, I'm Officer Reynolds with the Phoenix Police Department," Jake called out, his voice calm, but carrying enough authority to cut through Harold's altered state. "I need you to show me your hands and move slowly away from contact left." Harold suddenly screamed, spinning toward Reynolds with wild eyes that saw not a police officer trying to help, but an enemy soldier preparing to open fire. "Ambush! Ambush! Charlie Company, we are taking fire from multiple positions." The crowd gasped collectively as Harold stumbled backward, his hands raised not in surrender, but as if he were holding an invisible rifle. His military training, buried, but never forgotten, kicked in with muscle memory that transcended his mental confusion. He moved to take cover behind a parked Honda Civic, his body language that of a soldier under fire, rather than a confused elderly man having an episode. "He's got something!" Someone screamed from the crowd, though Harold's hands remained clearly empty. "Take him down," another voice demanded, "before someone gets hurt." Reynolds felt the weight of expectation, protocol, and public pressure converging on this single moment. Rex beside him tensed, reading his handler's elevated stress levels and preparing for whatever command might come. The dog's dark eyes remained fixed on Harold, but something in his posture suggested confusion rather than aggression, as if even Rex's highly trained instincts were telling him that this particular situation didn't fit the normal patterns of threat and response. Sergeant Martinez's voice crackled through Reynolds' radio. "Unit 47, deploy your K-9 for apprehension. Subject is non-compliant and potentially dangerous to civilians. Authorization code Alpha 77. Reynolds looked at Rex, then at Harold, then at the crowd of people with their cameras and their fear and their expectations. His hand moved to Rex's lead, and he felt the weight of a decision that would define not just this moment, but possibly the rest of his career. Time seemed to crystallize into individual heartbeats as Officer Jake Reynolds stood at the epicenter of a moment that would be dissected, analyzed, and remembered long after the last cell phone video stopped recording. His right hand gripped Rex's tactical lead with the practiced tension of a man who had made this same motion dozens of times before, but never under circumstances that felt so fundamentally wrong. "Rex, ready position," Reynolds commanded, his voice carrying across the silent crowd with military precision. The German shepherd responded instantly, his powerful body coiling into attack stance, hindquarters lowered, front legs braced, 90 pounds of controlled aggression focused like a laser on Harold Martinez. Rex's ears pinned back against his skull, his lips pulled away from teeth that could puncture steel, every muscle fiber primed for explosive action. The crowd's collective intake of breath was audible, a sharp hiss of anticipation and horror. Children were quickly pulled behind their parents. Veterans in wheelchairs were hastily moved to safer distances. Even hardened Phoenix residents who had seen their share of urban violence found themselves taking involuntary steps backward, from what appeared to be inevitable carnage. Harold, still lost in his Vietnam nightmare, registered the German shepherd's presence through the fractured lens of his flashback. But what he saw wasn't Rex, it was a North Vietnamese army attack dog, trained to track and kill American soldiers who had strayed too far from their units. His eyes, already wild with 50-year-old terror, filled with a recognition that transcended time and space. "God, no," Harold whispered, his voice breaking as he pressed himself against the Honda Civic that served as his imaginary foxhole. "Not the dogs. Please, not the dogs." His hands shook uncontrollably as memories of jungle warfare collided with present-day Phoenix, creating a psychological storm that no amount of training could have prepared him for. In Harold's fractured memory, he was reliving the aftermath of that ambush when his squad had been scattered across 3 kilometers of hostile jungle. Alone, wounded, and hunted by both human enemies and their 4-legged auxiliaries. He had spent 18 hours moving through elephant grass and bamboo thickets, listening to the distant barking of tracking dogs that grew closer with each passing hour. Rex, meanwhile, was experiencing something unprecedented in his 5 years of police work. His nostrils flared as an overwhelming cascade of scents hit his enhanced olfactory system like a tsunami of information. There was Harold's fear genuine, primal terror that spoke to the dog's deepest instincts. But layered beneath that fear was something else, something that triggered responses in Rex's brain that his police training had never addressed. The scent of old canvas and leather, weathered by decades of storage, but still carrying traces of jungle humidity. Gun oil that had been absorbed into fabric so long ago that it had become part of the material's molecular structure. Cordite residue. That clung to Harold's jacket like invisible fingerprints of battles fought when Rex's grandfather's grandfather hadn't yet been born. And underneath it all, something indefinable but unmistakable, the unique chemical signature of a man who had seen death, dealt death, and survived when others hadn't. Rex's head tilted slightly, his ears shifting from aggressive alertness to something approaching curiosity. His tail, rigid with attack readiness just moments before, gave an almost imperceptible twitch that Officer Reynolds, focused on crowd control and departmental protocol, completely missed. "Sir, show me your hands and step away from the vehicle," Reynolds shouted, his voice carrying the authority of law enforcement training, but lacking the conviction that usually accompanied such commands. Deep in his gut, every instinct he possessed was screaming that this situation was wrong, that Harold Martinez represented no threat to anyone except possibly himself. Harold's response was to duck lower behind the car, his military training asserting itself even through the haze of dementia and flashback. "Charlie Company, this is Martinez," he whispered into an invisible radio. "I'm pinned down by enemy forces with a tracking dog. Request immediate extraction. My position is..." His voice trailed off as the geography of Vietnam and Phoenix blurred together in his confused mind. The crowd pressed closer, their fear now mixed with morbid fascination. Cell phone cameras captured every angle, every expression, every tremor in Harold's hands and twitch in Rex's powerful frame. Social media feeds began lighting up with real-time updates. Police dog about to attack veteran. Elderly man cornered by K9 unit. This is going to be brutal. Sergeant Martinez's voice crackled through Reynolds' radio with increasing urgency. Unit 47, what's your status? Deploy the K9 immediately. We've got media arriving, and this needs to be resolved now. Reynolds felt the weight of protocol, departmental pressure, and public expectation converging into a single terrible moment of decision. His training was clear. Non-compliant subject, potential threat to public safety, use of force authorized. Rex was ready, willing, and capable of ending this situation in seconds with the kind of swift, decisive action that had built the dog's legendary reputation. But something was happening in Rex's consciousness that transcended training, protocol, and even the bonds of handler-dog partnership. As the German Shepherd stared at Harold Martinez, crouched behind that car with tears streaming down his weathered face, whispering the names of dead soldiers to an empty Phoenix Street, something deep in the dog's genetic memory stirred to life. Rex had never been to war, but his bloodline carried the DNA of German Shepherds who had served in both World Wars, Korea, and Vietnam. Dogs who had comforted dying soldiers, carried messages through artillery fire, and provided the only warmth and companionship available in the cold mathematics of combat. Rex's great-grandfather had been a military working dog who died pulling wounded G's to safety during the Tet Offensive. His great-great-grandmother had guided blind veterans through their first steps into civilian life. Rex, attack, now. The command split the air like a gunshot, carrying with it the full weight of law enforcement authority and crowd expectation. But Rex, staring into Harold's terrified eyes, saw something that his training had never prepared him to recognize. But his DNA remembered perfectly, a soldier who had given everything for his country, and was now fighting the hardest battle of all, the one against his own memories. For the first time in his perfect career, Rex hesitated. The word attack exploded across the downtown Phoenix Plaza like a grenade detonating in the silence. It carried with it the full weight of law enforcement authority, departmental protocol, and 48 previous successful deployments where Rex had never failed, never hesitated, never questioned the righteousness of his mission. The crowd held its collective breath, cell phone cameras trembling in hands that anticipated recording either justice or tragedy, depending on one's perspective. Officer Jake Reynolds felt the tactical lead grow taut in his grip as Rex's powerful frame surged forward, but only for a single step. Then, in a moment that would defy everything Reynolds thought he knew about his partner, everything the Phoenix Police Department had invested in canine training, and everything the crowd expected from this volatile confrontation, Rex did something unprecedented. He stopped. Not the controlled stop of a dog awaiting further commands, but the confused, almost bewildered stop of an intelligent creature whose deepest instincts had suddenly overridden 5 years of conditioning. Rex's massive head turned slightly, his dark eyes shifting between Harold's terrified face and Officer Reynolds' tense posture, as if asking a question that neither human nor canine language could adequately express. "Rex, what are you doing?" Reynolds hissed under his breath, yanking the lead with practiced authority. "Attack, no?" But Rex's paws remained planted on the hot Phoenix asphalt, as if they had grown roots. His ears, which should have been pinned back in aggressive pursuit, began to pivot forward, the classic German Shepherd expression of curiosity rather than aggression. His tail, rigid with attack readiness just moments before, started the slightest hint of movement that anyone familiar with dog behavior would recognize as the beginning of a wag. Harold Martinez, still trapped in his Vietnam flashback, watched the German Shepherd's approach with the resigned terror of a man who had survived one war only to be killed by the ghosts of another. But as Rex drew nearer, moving now with deliberate slowness rather than explosive aggression, something in the dog's demeanor penetrated even Harold's fractured consciousness. "King?" Harold whispered, the name escaping his lips like a prayer. To a saint he thought he'd lost forever. "King, is that you, boy?" The name hit Rex like an electric shock. Not because he recognized it. He had never been called King, but because something in Harold's voice, some combination of hope and heartbreak, triggered a response that bypassed every circuit board of police training and went straight to the phone. Most primitive, most essential part of what it meant to be a dog in service to humans. King had been Charlie Company's beloved German Shepherd scout dog, officially designated as MWD, Military Working Dog, K9 to 47, but universally known simply as King to the 37 men whose lives he had saved countless times during their tour. In Southeast Asia, King had been Harold's closest companion during those 13 months in hell, the only living creature who truly understood the weight of responsibility that came with keeping men alive in a place where death lurked behind every tree and under every step. King had died on March 15, 1968, the same day as the ambush that earned Harold his Purple Heart and cost him his peace of mind. The dog had stepped on a pressure plate mine while leading the patrol, taking the explosion that would have killed Harold and at least 3 other soldiers. Harold had carried King's body for 2 miles through hostile territory, refusing to leave his partner behind, even as enemy fire forced the rest of the unit to retreat. Rex couldn't possibly know any of this history, but something in his genetic memory, some ancestral echo of thousands of years of partnership between German shepherds and humans in uniform, recognized the sacred bond that Harold's broken voice represented. Without any conscious decision, without regard for training or commands or the expectant crowd, Rex began to walk forward again, not with the controlled aggression of a police dog executing an arrest, but with the gentle, purposeful movement of a therapy animal approaching someone in desperate need. "What the hell is he doing?" Sergeant Martinez's voice crackled through Reynolds' radio with increasing alarm. "Deploy that dog immediately, or I'll have another unit do it." But Reynolds found himself paralyzed by the unprecedented situation unfolding before him. In 5 years of partnership, Rex had never disobeyed a direct command. The dog's success rate was perfect, his reliability absolute, his responses as predictable as sunrise. Yet here was Rex, ignoring orders, ignoring training, ignoring everything, except some internal compass that was guiding him toward an old man who represented no threat to anyone except himself. The crowd began to murmur with confusion and anticipation. This wasn't the swift, decisive police action they had expected. Cell phone videos captured every second of Rex's slow, deliberate approach, documenting what would soon become one of the most viewed pieces of footage in social media history. But in that moment, the crowd didn't know they were witnessing history. They only knew that something unprecedented was happening, something that none of their previous experience with police encounters had prepared them for. Harold remained crouched behind the Honda Civic, his eyes locked on Rex's approaching form. The flashback was beginning to fracture around the edges as reality leaked through the cracks in his traumatic memories. This dog moving toward him didn't have the lean, hungry look of a North Vietnamese tracking hound. This dog's eyes held intelligence and something that looked almost like ... compassion. "Easy, boy," Harold whispered, extending one trembling hand in a gesture that was part surrender, part invitation. "I know you're just doing your job." King would understand. Rex was now close enough that Harold could see the details of his face. Intelligent brown eyes, the perfectly groomed coat, the powerful jaw that could crush bone, but was held in relaxed, non-threatening position. More importantly, Rex could smell Harold's scent in its full complexity. The fear, yes, but underneath that, the lingering traces of a man who had spent his life in service to others, who had carried the weight of command and the responsibility for other lives, who had sacrificed pieces of his soul on an altar of duty and honor. When Rex finally reached Harold's position, instead of executing the takedown that his training demanded, the massive German shepherd did something that no one in the crowd, no one in the police department, and certainly no one watching the live streams could have predicted. He sat down. Not the alert, ready position of a working dog awaiting further commands, but the relaxed, companionable sit of a dog settling in beside a friend. Rex's powerful frame lowered until he was eye level with the crouching Harold, and then, with infinite gentleness, the dog that had never failed to complete a mission chose to redefine what mission completion actually meant. Rex placed his massive head against Harold's trembling leg and closed his eyes, offering not aggression or arrest, but the simple, wordless comfort of one warrior to another. The moment Rex's worn head settled against Harold's trembling leg, something shifted in the fabric of reality itself. The busy Phoenix Street seemed to fade into background noise as two souls, one human, one canine, found each other across the vast chasm of species, training, and half a century of buried pain. Harold's weathered hand, which had been shaking with terror just moments before, slowly, tentatively, came to rest on Rex's broad skull. "Good boy," Harold whispered, his voice barely audible, but carrying the weight of 5 decades' worth of grief, finally finding its voice. "You're such a good boy." The crowd, which had been holding its collective breath in anticipation of violence, now found itself witnessing something far more powerful and unexpected than any arrest could have been. Margaret O'Brien, the elderly woman who had earlier called for police intervention, felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched the massive German Shepherd press closer to Harold, offering the kind of wordless comfort that transcended human understanding. "Oh my God," she whispered to her daughter, clutching her arm. "Look at them. Just look at them." Rex, feeling Harold's gentle touch, experienced something that his 5 years of police training had never prepared him for. The constant tension that came with being a weapon, always ready, always alert, always prepared to do violence in service of the law, began to melt away like ice in the Arizona sun. For the first time since his puppyhood, Rex simply existed as what he had always been beneath the training and the badge and the tactical gear. A dog who understood that sometimes the most important job was just to be present for someone who needed him. Harold's fingers found the soft spot behind Rex's ears, a place that had always been King's favorite. The texture of German Shepherd fur beneath his hands was like a time machine, carrying him back not to the horrors of war, but to the quiet moments between patrols when he and King would sit together in their foxhole, finding comfort in each other's presence while rockets whistled overhead and machine gun fire chattered in the distance. "You know, don't you?" Harold murmured, his voice growing stronger as reality slowly reasserted itself over the flashback that had held him prisoner. "You understand what it's like to serve, to carry responsibility for others. King always knew when I was struggling. He just ... He just sit with me, just like this." Rex's response was to shift even closer, his 90 pounds of muscle and warmth becoming a living anchor that helped Harold find his way back to the present. The dog's steady breathing, deep and rhythmic, began to synchronize with Harold's own panicked gasps, naturally guiding the elderly veteran toward calm through the simple act of shared respiration. Officer Reynolds stood frozen in place, his radio crackling with increasingly urgent demands from Sergeant Martinez. "Unit 47, what's your status? Why hasn't the subject been apprehended? I'm seeing live video feeds of your K9 refusing orders." But Reynolds couldn't bring himself to interfere with what was happening. In his 5 years partnered with Rex, he had seen the dog's professional capabilities, his unwavering obedience, his lethal efficiency. But he had never seen Rex demonstrate the kind of emotional intelligence that was now on display. It was as if the German Shepherd had recognized something in Harold that all the humans, present including Reynolds himself, had missed. Around them, the crowd began to transform as well. The initial fear and hostility that had characterized their response to Harold's erratic behavior was being replaced by something far more complex and human. Robert Chun, the Vietnam veteran who had tried earlier to calm Harold, stepped forward with tears in his eyes. "I know what he's going through," Chun said loudly enough for others to hear. "That dog knows too. Look at them, they recognize each other." Harold's memories of King came flooding back with crystalline clarity. King had been more than a working dog. He had been therapist, companion, and guardian angel rolled into one faithful package. During Harold's darkest moments after losing men under his command, after witnessing horrors that no 20-year-old should ever see, King had been there, offering the kind of unconditional support that only a dog could provide. King saved my life so many times, Harold said, his voice now clear and present, the fog of dementia and flashback finally lifting, not just from the enemy, but from myself. When I wanted to give up, when I couldn't see any reason to keep going, King would just ... he'd just be there, reminding me that someone still needed me. Rex seemed to understand every word. His tail began a slow, gentle wag that spoke not of excitement or agitation, but of deep contentment. This was what he had been bred for, what his ancestors had done for thousands of years before police work and attack training had redirected their noble instincts. This was the original compact between dog and human, to provide comfort, companionship, and unwavering loyalty to those who needed it most. The transformation in Harold was remarkable to witness. The confused, terrified old man who had been trapped in a Vietnam nightmare was gradually being replaced by the person he truly was, a decorated veteran who had given his youth in service to his country and was now struggling with the very human challenge of aging and memory loss. Rex's presence was like a bridge connecting Harold's fractured present with his honored past. "You remind me so much of him," Harold said, running his hands along Rex's powerful frame. "King was smaller than you, scrappier, but he had the same heart, the same understanding. He knew things about war that they don't teach in any manual, like how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just sit with someone who's afraid." Members of the crowd began to move closer, drawn by the obvious healing taking place before their eyes. The cell phone cameras, which had been held high to capture potential violence, were now recording something far more precious, the moment when two beings found exactly what they needed in each other. Maria Martinez's voice suddenly cut through the crowd. "Papa, Papa, there you are." Harold's daughter pushed through the ring of onlookers, her face streaked with tears of relief and something approaching awe as she saw her father sitting peacefully with the massive police dog. "Mia," Harold said, looking up at his daughter with eyes that were clear and present for the first time in hours. "I want you to meet my new friend. He reminds me of King." Rex looked up at Maria's approach, his tail continuing its gentle rhythm, as if to say, "Don't worry, I've got him. He's safe now." What happened next would be remembered by everyone present as the moment when a crowd became a community, when strangers became family, and when the true meaning of Veterans Day revealed itself not through speeches or ceremonies, but through the simple act of human compassion recognizing itself in unexpected places. Robert Chun was the first to step forward, his own Vietnam service ribbons catching the phoenix sunlight as he moved through the crowd with the careful gait of a man whose knees still carried shrapnel from the Mekong Delta. Behind him, as if drawn by some invisible force, came others, men and women whose shared experience of military service created bonds that transcended age, race, and the passage of time. "Easy there, brother," Chun said softly, approaching Harold and Rex with the practiced calm of someone who had talked fellow veterans down from psychological ledges before. "You're safe now. The mission's over. You made it home." Harold looked up from where he sat with Rex's warm weight pressed against his side, his eyes focusing on Chun's weathered face with growing recognition not of the individual, but of the type. The look of a man who had seen too much, survived too much, and carried too much, but had somehow found a way to keep moving forward anyway. "You were there too," Harold said, and it wasn't a question. Different time, maybe different place, but you were there. "Da Nang, 69 through 70, Chun confirmed, settling down on the hot asphalt beside Harold despite his protesting joints. "And you're right, different coordinates, same war." Behind them, The crowd was undergoing a transformation that would have been impossible to orchestrate, but was beautiful to witness as it unfolded organically. Miguel Santos, a Desert Storm veteran confined to a wheelchair after an IED explosion in Kuwait, rolled forward through the parted crowd. Sarah Thompson, whose daughter had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before coming home with invisible wounds that were still healing, found herself standing beside a Korean War veteran named William Park, who had never spoken publicly about his service until this moment. "Stand down, soldier," Santos called out with gentle authority, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone who had held command in difficult places. "Your watch is over. We've got you now." The words hit Harold like absolution after 50 years of carrying guilt that no one had ever told him he could put down. Tears began flowing freely down his cheeks, not the confused, frightened tears of his earlier flashback, but the cleansing tears of a man finally understanding that he wasn't alone, had never been alone, and that the brotherhood forged in fire endures long after the flames have died. Rex seemed to sense the shift in emotional energy around them. His position against Harold remained steady and supportive, but his eyes began taking in the growing circle of veterans with what could only be described as approval. Somehow, the intelligent German shepherd understood that what had begun as a potential arrest had evolved into something far more important. A moment of healing not just for Harold, but for an entire community of people who had served their country and were now serving each other. Maria Martinez stood at the edge of the circle, her hands pressed to her mouth as she watched her father surrounded by strangers, who were treating him not as a problem to be solved or a spectacle to be gawked at, but as a brother to be protected. Behind her, 8-year-old Sophia clung to her mother's leg, her young eyes wide with wonder at seeing so many adults crying without shame or embarrassment. "Why are they all crying, Mama?" Sophia whispered. "Because they remember Mia," Maria replied, her own voice thick with emotion. "They remember what it means to take care of each other." A circle of veterans continued to grow as word spread through the crowd. Frank Morrison, a Marine who had lost his left arm in Fallujah, stood shoulder to shoulder with Elena Rodriguez, an Army medic who had served in Kandahar. James Wright, a Navy corpsman from the First Gulf War, found himself next to Patricia Davis, an Air Force pilot who had flown humanitarian missions over Bosnia. Each brought their own scars, their own memories, their own understanding of what Harold was experiencing. "I get lost sometimes too," admitted Morrison, addressing Harold directly. "Different kind of lost, but lost all the same. That's why we need each other." Harold nodded, one hand still resting on Rex's head while the other reached out to accept the human connection being offered to him. "I forget things now," he said, his voice steady despite the tears. "Important things, things I don't want to forget. But I remember you all. I remember what we were asked to do, and I remember that we did it." Officer Reynolds, still standing at the periphery, with his radio crackling with increasingly urgent demands for action, found himself faced with a situation that no police academy course had ever covered. His canine partner was providing therapy instead of enforcement. His potential arrestee was surrounded by a protective circle of veterans who clearly had no intention of allowing any harm to come to one of their own. And the crowd that had initially seemed hostile and fearful was now openly weeping at the display of military brotherhood and canine compassion. "Unit 47, this is command. What is your current status? We need that situation resolved immediately." Sergeant Martinez's voice cut through the radio static with barely controlled frustration. Reynolds looked at the scene before him, Harold safe in Rex's protective presence, surrounded by fellow veterans who had spontaneously formed their own security perimeter. The crowd transformed from potential mob to supportive community and made a decision that would define the rest of his career. "Command, this is Unit 47, he radioed back, his voice calm and professional. Situation is under control. Subject is calm and cooperative, surrounded by military veterans providing support. Requesting permission to allow civilian mental health intervention rather than arrest. The pause on the radio seemed to last forever, filled with the murmur of conversation, the gentle sound of Rex's breathing, and Harold's voice as he began to share stories of King with his newfound brothers and sisters in arms. Finally, Sergeant Martinez's voice returned. Unit 47. Maintain position and monitor. We're sending a crisis intervention team to your location. Around Harold and Rex, the community that had formed in those precious moments began to solidify into something permanent and healing, proving that sometimes the most important victories are won not through force or authority, but through the simple recognition that we all carry wounds, and we all deserve to be surrounded by those who understand. 6 months later, the video that Maria Martinez had uploaded with trembling fingers from the Phoenix Veterans Memorial Plaza had been viewed 127 million times across every social media platform imaginable. But numbers, however staggering, could never capture the true impact of what became known simply as the Rex moment, a 3-minute and 47-second clip that fundamentally changed how America viewed its veterans, its police officers, and the healing power of compassion over force. The Phoenix Police Department's conference room buzzed with energy as Chief Patricia Williams presented Rex with a specially commissioned medal, the first of its kind for a K-9 officer who had demonstrated extraordinary humanity in the line of duty. Rex sat at perfect attention beside Officer Jake Reynolds, his German Shepherd dignity intact despite the red, white, and blue ribbon that would mark him forever as the dog who chose love over law. Rex has shown us that true courage isn't always about following orders, Chief Williams announced to the assembled media. Sometimes it's about knowing when to break them for a higher purpose. But the real transformation wasn't happening in conference rooms or news studios. It was happening every Tuesday morning at the Phoenix VA Medical Center, where Rex had begun his new dual role as both police K-9 and certified therapy animal. The program, officially named the King Initiative in honor of Harold's fall in Vietnam, Companion had become a model that police departments and VA hospitals across the nation were rushing to replicate. Harold Martinez sat in his usual spot in the VA's courtyard garden, his memory clearer than it had been in years, thanks to the new treatment protocols that Dr. Sarah Chun, Robert Chun's daughter, and the facility's lead neurologist had developed, specifically for combat veterans with dementia. Beside him, Rex dozed in the morning sun, one massive paw resting protectively across Harold's feet. "Tell me about today's mission, soldier," Harold said softly, scratching behind Rex's ears in the way that had become their ritual. It was a phrase that helped Harold stay grounded in the present while honoring his past, a therapeutic technique that Dr. Chun had adapted from military debriefing protocols. Rex's mission that morning had been particularly challenging. He had worked with Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, a young woman whose convoy had been hit by an IED outside Kabul, leaving her with PTSD, so severe that she hadn't spoken to another human being in 6 weeks. But something about Rex's patient presence, his steady breathing, and his complete lack of judgment had finally allowed her to whisper the words she'd been holding inside. "I should have seen it coming. I should have saved them." Rex had simply placed his head in her lap and stayed there while she cried for the first time since coming home. Dr. Chun later noted in her files that it was the breakthrough they'd been working toward for months, not through medication or traditional therapy, but through the healing power of unconditional acceptance from a creature who understood service, loss, and the weight of responsibility. The ripple effects of that November day continued to spread in ways both large and small. Congressional hearings had led to the Veterans Mental Health Support Act, which allocated $2.3 billion for innovative therapy programs, including animal-assisted treatment. The Phoenix Police Department had received international recognition for their progressive approach to crisis intervention, with law enforcement agencies from 12 countries sending delegations to study their methods. But perhaps the most meaningful changes were the personal ones. Officer Reynolds had been promoted to head the department's new crisis response K9 unit, where 5 additional dogs were being trained in the dual-purpose model that Rex had pioneered. Each animal learned traditional police work alongside therapy techniques, creating a new breed of law enforcement officer capable of healing as well as protecting. At the Martinez family's modest Phoenix home, Tuesday evenings had become sacred time. Harold's dementia progression had slowed remarkably. His doctors attributed it to the sense of purpose he'd found in sharing his story with other veterans. Rex would arrive with Officer Reynolds for dinner, transforming from working dog to beloved family member as Sophia taught him increasingly elaborate tricks, and Harold regaled them with stories of Vietnam that he could now share without drowning in them. Rex understands things that people don't, Harold would often say, watching the German shepherd play gentle tug-of-war with his granddaughter. He knows that some battles never really end, but he also knows that's okay. King taught me that too, but I'd forgotten until Rex reminded me. The international media attention had been overwhelming at first, but Harold had found ways to use his newfound platform purposefully. His testimony before Congress about veteran mental health needs had been viewed by over 30 million people. His partnership with Rex in demonstrating therapy techniques had led to the establishment of similar programs in 43 states and 6 foreign countries. On a warm Tuesday evening in late spring, exactly 1 year after their first meeting, Harold and Rex sat together in the same spot where their lives had intersected so dramatically. The Veterans Memorial Plaza had been expanded to include a new section dedicated to military working dogs and their handlers, with a bronze statue depicting a soldier and his canine partner that bore more than a passing resemblance to Harold. And King, you know what the best part is? Harold said to Rex, who was watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of gold and crimson. King would be so proud of you. You're doing what he always did, reminding us that we're worth saving, worth healing, worth fighting for. Rex's tail thumped against the memorial bench in response, and Harold could swear he saw something in the dog's intelligent eyes that looked like understanding, like acknowledgement of a sacred trust passed from one faithful companion to another across the span of 50 years and 10,000 miles. As the stars emerged over Phoenix, Harold Martinez and Rex settled into their comfortable routine of shared silence. 2 warriors who had found peace in each other's company and had shown the world that sometimes the greatest victories are won, not through strength or strategy, but through the simple, revolutionary act of choosing compassion when the world expects conflict. Their story had become legend, but their friendship had become something even more precious, proof that healing is always possible, that service takes many forms, and that love, in the end, conquers all.